Hello guys, David Vose here. Oh, what a beautiful day. It really is a beautiful day here. Clear skies and pleasant weather, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Well, we're gonna do it. I'm just sad that only 1,000, or if I get real fortunate, maybe 2,000 people will watch this, even though there are channels galore, thousands of different channels out there that just talk about nonsense or very similar to things that I'm talking about, and they're getting thousands and thousands and thousands of clicks. Now, maybe they're more entertaining than I am, and maybe they've got better illustrations and they're funny or something. But I guarantee the information that you're going to be hearing on those channels is not going to be the information you're going to be hearing here. And it may be that I'm boring, but friends, if you can bear through it under this boredom, you really should watch this. And you should share it. And people should know this. YouTube is shadow banning in such a way my channel that nobody can find my channel. I almost think it's coming up invisible when you search for it. I don't know, but they've done something to stop people from me knowing I'm here. And the only people that watch my videos, all of them, because I can look in the analytics. You can go into analytics where you can go and look and find out certain facts about your channel, who's watching and how many and where they're at and what kinds of people are watching. And well, I don't have any new people watching. It's all the people that have been watching for years. And they're the only ones who watch. And you guys are here every day and you watch every day. But I don't know how to get this out to other people. It doesn't seem like anybody wants to get it out to anybody so that people can find this information out. But as you know, we've been talking about some very important things. Yesterday we talked about orgies, right? And we talked about how the temple orgy was not a necessarily people coming and having sex, although they may have done that. But it also had to do with slashing and sacrifices. And it was the word orgy is a specific word that refers to these mysteries or these sacred rites that they held in the temple. And it's important because all the way through the Bible, through the New Testament, it says the wrath of deity is coming, and that word is orgy. So we've got to understand what this orgy was. Is it good? Is it bad? Because we've got a lot of people out there saying, oh, these mysteries that these people did were orgies, and they drank blood and they had some kind of sacrament like Christians. And some people are saying they used a woman's menstrual, and we won't say anymore. But I'm going to show you that that's not true. There certainly were certain mysteries and rites of the temple. And now we're not talking about the Jewish temple, because they forbade all of these things, and they called this virgin. Now remember, Jesus was born of one of these virgins. They called her a whore. So they didn't agree with any of this. Well, we've shown that Judah married Tamar the Canaanite, Samson married Delilah, Joshua married Rahab the harlot, the high priestess of the Canaanites. We've gone down through the list. Naamah was of the line of Cain, was married to Noah. And the great mother is a Canaanite mother. And she's the holy priestess, the holy virgin that gives birth to the Messiah. So all the royal bloodlines had to marry this holy priest. And she was of the holy tower. So this is why Mary is called Mary Magdala, because Magdal means the tower. And that tower was at Heliopolis. And Josephus says that Jerusalem was built there. It was rebuilt there. And that the last of the zadokite priests served there at Heliopolis in the Jerusalem that was rebuilt. And that the guy's name who was the last priest was Jesus. And his predecessor was John. Now, we've done video after video on this. And if you want to know more about that, go back and watch some of these other videos. But today we're going to dig really deep. And this is going to be a very big surprise to a lot of people. And it's going to be shocking for you to find out what Christianity originally was. No, it was not some kind of idolatry. But according to the Apostle Paul, the temples, remember, Paul taught at the temple of Artemis in the amphitheater, which was for orations and for talks. Beside the temple, it had to do with the temple complex and the gymnasiums and the baptism. This is why Paul was on the road to Damascus. And he was 3 years being initiated. And at the end of the initiation, he heard the words that were unlawful to be spoken. They were the holy initiation truths and doctrines, and they were the holy mysteries that were given to people who were initiated. Once you understand what we're going to talk about today and what these mysteries were, you will then understand why the Apostle Paul says that he was there for 3 years and then heard these words that were unlawful to speak. And you'll understand why he said he went to the third heaven, which is paradise, whether in the body or out of the body, he could not say. Because, you see, that was the mysteries at Artemis and the Eleusinian mysteries, which basically was Athens, the mystery of Athens. And that was the mystery of Diana and Rome. And she had, different temples throughout the world. But she was the mother, the Virgin Mother. And there was a certain sacrament and a certain priesthood. And they ate a meal. It was the love feast that Christianity used to have. And there was this ecstatic dancing and speaking of tongues. And you left your body. You were out of it. You died and were raised up again. That's what the resurrection is. It is going into a basic coma where you, for at least 3 days, you're gone. But they have some kind of an antidote, or the herb that they partook of. It was kind of a potion. They spiked their wine. Some of them used beer. Some of them used date juice, which was a stronger drink. But in different places, they use different things. The Native Americans here use peyote. There's just various things that you can use. The amanita mushroom is what I used. And I was gone for a couple of days. But when you come back, and the thing of it is, you go through the most horrific hell in your mind. You're led through hell. And finally, you reach heaven. And you see the fields and the flowers. And sometimes you'll see Jesus or the elders. In my case, I saw Mary. But from that point forward, you become immortal because you know there is no death. And so you go unto paradise. All prophets who ever were a prophet had this experience. If you notice, Moses tells you all about the Garden of Eden and paradise. So Isaiah talks about the Lord's throne and the animals, which is astrology. And he tells you about the nature of heaven, the grand city. Revelation tells you about it. All prophets, Jeremiah, all of them, will take you to this great, beautiful paradise and give you a description of it, as if they had gone there, like Enoch, who was the first one that went to this area. Now remember, Enoch is Thoth in the Egyptian. So our book of Enoch is really the book of astrology. And it was just the Judean version, or a Reader's Digest version of the holy writing, which is the hieroglyphs. Hiero meaning holy, and glyph meaning writing. And the holy writing is astrology, and it's written in the stars. And the Apostle Paul, quoting from Psalms, tells you that the gospel goes forth from the stars, line upon line, to every nation on the face of the earth. They all know about the gospel, which is written in the stars. And every nation would also then write it down in book form or cuneiform or some other kind of thing, and that's what we call writing. That's what we call the holy books. They didn't have novels and comic books and pornography and all that kind of crap in those days. They only had the holy writings written by the priests because the peasants didn't know how to write or read. They knew primitive words and different things about how to, ask for food or where is the town or how far we're going to go today. But they had a basic understanding of the language. They could not express it by writing or even reading. So the holy writing is the story that's written in the sky, which tells about the grand story of the fool, or as he's known as the Joker in the deck of cards going around the roulette wheel of this wheel of fortune we call astrology. And he's going up and down and around, life and death, rah, 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 rah. And their holy Virgin Mother is in there, and the birth and death and resurrection of the Son of Deity. And Paul used to say, but we don't know it because we're Christians. And we don't know because we've never been told what these words mean. But Paul says, look how I know the mysteries. The mysteries were the temple rites of the Greeks. They weren't the rites of the Jewish temple. And Paul knew these mysteries, the mysterion. And the orgy was one of these rites of the Holy Temple. Now, we don't know a lot about what they did in these orgies. But today, people think it has to do with sex. And only sex. Well, it certainly probably did have to do with something about sex, because it was about the Arios Gamos, which is the holy wedding that brought forth the Holy Messiah. He would be born of this virgin, which was a high priestess of the Canaanite religion. And the Greek and the Babylonian and the Sumerian and all these others that carry on these traditions, like Ishtar and Astarte and Aphrodite and these Artemis. Artemis was the grandmother of the universe, the Holy Virgin. And at Artemis, they had priests called Essenes. Just a coincidence? I don't think so. They also had the eunuchs that Jesus said he wanted you to become. And the virgins used to follow him around. And they had the love feasts, according to the apostles. Now, what are the love feasts? It's very clear if you want to go back into history and look what the love feasts were. And the Apostle Paul was upset with them. They were speaking in glossolalia, or tongues, which is what the priests at Artemis, the temple of Artemis and the Eleusinian mysteries and the temple of Diana. But the Apostle Paul was upset with them because he said they were all coming together. And when they came together all in one place, he says, some of you are eating too much and some of you don't get to eat anything. You're all gluttons and you're drinking wine and you're talking out of turn. Nobody knows what's going on. It's a spirit of confusion. We're talking apostasy was already setting in there at the gatherings. They're up in Ephesus and Colossia and Asia Minor, where they were gathering in the temples and doing the dancing and the big love feast, and they were getting out of control. And maybe the orgies turned into something that they weren't supposed to be. They turned the holy kiss into some other kind of kiss. And Paul wasn't too happy about it. Remember where Paul says that there is a man who has committed fornication. We're going to show you what that word means. It means prostitution. With his father's wife. So he was prostituting his own father's concubine or wife or something. Well, we find this in classical literature as well, where some of these orgies and places would turn into something where this one guy would sleep with his sisters on public exhibition. They turn these love feasts into public nudity and exhibition sex. And Paul says, hand such a one over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit might be saved in the day of the Lord. But this is where the Apostle Paul was saying that we don't judge those outside. We don't judge people that we talk to, and we're not anybody's judge. But in these holy communal orders and the temple where we're doing these sacred things, we don't allow this. And that is something that the apostles forbade, which was the porneia. And that means prostitution. And we're going to show you here in a moment conclusive proof that it had nothing to do with just any kind of sex, but it was some kind of temple prostitution that was never to be intended for the temples. But all throughout the world, they had, just about every one of these nations, all of them, had their temples, and they had the mysteries that were in the temples. The Oracle of Sybil, they were ecstatic dancing and speaking in some tongue in this ecstatic dance. And they would write it down as an oracle of the divine, of Theos. And all the Greeks worshiped Theos, who was the father of the other Olympians. And this is what the Bible says hundreds of times throughout the New Testament, is that we worship Theos. So there's a lot we can go into. We're going to talk about the love feast. We're going to talk about the sacrament and the spiking of the wine and what was actually occurring when their eyes were opened. We're going to talk about the holy kiss. Yes, the Bible talks about greet one another with a holy kiss. What is that? What are we talking about? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to look it up. Nobody wants to investigate, because the people who are scholars and might be able to come up with this information evidently are under some oath that they can't tell you. They've deprived you of the truth. Now, I want to show you Acts chapter 15, verse 29. And I'm going to give you a little background, and we're going to look at it in the interlinear Greek. But this is, of course, as you guys know, there were some who were zealous for the law. And they're running around telling everybody, unless you keep the law of Moses, you cannot be saved. And so the apostles came all together, and the apostles and the elders, the apostles and the elders. Now, the elders were the 72. That's what that means. You've never been told that. But the elders aren't just some older people, like a handful of old, oh, he's an elder, we'll bring him down here. No, this was the Sanhedrin. This was a divine authority. The Sanhedrin had divine authority. So our Bible says James was the guy with the gavel. And he was over the Ebionites, which is the poor. If you look that up, you'll see elsewhere they're also called Essenes. James the righteous was over the Essenes, not there in Jerusalem at Herod's temple. And there was, according to our Bible, a Sanhedrin, the elders and the apostles, that met and made a decree. You cannot make a decree unless you are a Sanhedrin with a divine authority. So we also know that James was the zadokite priest, James the righteous. That's what it means. The teacher of righteousness of the Essenes were the zadokite priesthood. And they didn't, the Essenes weren't in Jerusalem. They didn't control Jerusalem. They were somewhere beyond the Jordan, at the house of Bethany. Bethany is house, Beth, Ani, with the Greek syntax, it's just the house of On. And that is Heliopolis. On, the city of On and the city of Heliopolis are just two different ways that they would speak of that place. The Greeks sometimes called it Heliopolis, but before that it had the name of On, and part of the reason for that is because Anu, or January, or John, was the high priest. And it just so happened that John the Baptist had that name because it was a title. Well, here is a list of the priests all the way down to 6770 AD. Notice that the last priest is Phannius ben Samuel. And before that is Theophilus and then Gamla. And, you know, we go up here to back in the days before Christ. You see there it was Joseph ben Caiaphas. But there is no James the Just or James the Zadokite priest. Why? Because the Zadokite priesthood, according to Josephus in all history, was at Heliopolis. They built the temple at Heliopolis, they called Jerusalem. And the Zadokite priests, which are the only legitimate priests, whose name was John, and the last one was Jesus. And somewhere just before 70 AD, James was the high priest. And it existed until 73 AD. Then there was no more Sanhedrin on the earth. And after that, the Judeans tried to invent a council and make decisions, but it was not authorized by the Lord, and neither was the Nicene Council or any other council after that. But here we are at a council where the elders, the Sanhedrin met, and the apostles are the 12. And they heard from speakers, Peter, Paul, James, and all the rest of them spoke about how the Lord has sent his Holy Spirit and told Peter in a vision, we're not under the law no more. And so James has the last word. He's going to give his decision. Now, why James? Because James was James the Just. That's his name, James the Righteous. And the word righteous is zadokite. So he was of the zadokite priesthood. It's the same as the Melchizedek. And he was not in Judea. He was at Heliopolis, James. And the Sanhedrin was there at Heliopolis. And how we know is because James was the one giving the decision at the Sanhedrin. And yet, if you look in history, the Sanhedrin that was at Jerusalem up there at Herod's temple, they didn't have James as the high priest. But if you look in Josephus' writings, he'll tell you about the Zadokite line going down to 70 AD at Heliopolis. And they indeed had the Zadokite priesthood. They were the last of the Zadokite priests. So we know where James was making his decision, at Heliopolis. In fact, James was taken to the pinnacle of the temple and thrown off. That's how he was martyred. Well, there's no pinnacle to the temple at Herod's temple. The pinnacle is a pyramid. Jesus was also taken to the pinnacle of the temple and offered all things, and so was Abraham. Now, so they've made their decision. They say, we're not under law, but we're going to have you do these necessary things. We're admonishing you to do these necessary things. And here's what it says, Acts chapter 15, verse 29. To abstain, and that word means to, separate yourselves or to stay away from, have nothing to do with, things sacrificed to idols. And the word there means, the idea of things being in there, like meat. People imply that it means meat. We shouldn't eat meat because it might have been sacrificed to an idol. That's not what the word says. That word is abstain from sacrificing to idols. That's what the word actually means. Not the meat. We're not abstaining from the meat. We're abstaining from sacrificing to idols. And from blood. Now, growing up Jehovah's Witness, they taught us that mean we couldn't take blood transfusions. How ridiculous, right? Well, it's interesting because the first thing that would come to my mind is, abstain from blood. Well, if I didn't have the rest of the verse there, I would think, well, maybe it means shedding blood. That would be a good thing to, if you're going to give people only 3 things that you don't do. We're not under law, but here's 3 things that we don't want to do. Worship or sacrifice to idols and blood. And I would assume, well, that means killing an animal and draining the blood or drinking the blood at a sacrifice. Did people drink blood? What was it? Was it don't kill? Well, if you look at the whole context here, it's all about idolatry. It's all about worship. It's not about laws. It's not about don't kill or don't, But that word sacrifice actually means to kill. But it's not just any old killing because it's to idols. So obviously it has to do with offering. It has the connotation there of offering what you kill to an idol. And from blood. Now, do we need to know what they were doing in those sacrifices? In their culture, in their day, maybe different priesthoods did different things, and we don't know. But obviously, some of them were drinking blood. Now, these Satanists today think, oh, well, we've got to put blood in it, and Jesus was really the devil, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know, the kind of insanity that these people are talking about. Somebody's got to counter this. The Bible tells us not to drink blood. And I don't think it means, oh, people are running around like vampires, sucking the blood out of animals. Don't do it. Maybe, but that would certainly be precluded. That would certainly be something we shouldn't do. Does he have to name all the different things that you might do with blood that you shouldn't do? Probably includes killing too, doesn't it? But what do you do when you kill an animal? You drain its blood, but in sacrifices, there were people that were drinking the blood. And so you Satanists out there, don't use the Bible anymore to teach people what you guys believe. Because Christians don't believe that. People who follow what Jesus taught in his apostles. We don't drink blood. We don't shed blood. We don't even kill animals and offer them up to the gods. Whether it's idols or not, because as a Christian, we don't believe in gods. We don't. We believe in the Pantocrator, which is the all-perfect Almighty. But he's never called God. That's a German mythological figure. The word God has some particular connotation that's nowhere found in the Bible. Right? The Olympians, Zeus was over the Olympians and they fought the Titans. There's no gods in there. They were immortal ones, yes. And they were the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who lived hundreds, maybe thousands of years. The 930 years we have in our Bible is the code. I have to keep repeating this because there might be one new person come in here and they wouldn't know this. Or a few of you have only watched a few of these videos and you don't know what we've taught, what we've shown. So this is obviously to do with false worship. Why is it so important that we don't have false worship? Because look, he's not telling you some laws. We don't keep the law, but we're going to keep these 3 laws. If he's going to do that, he'd just say, don't murder, don't rape, something like that. Don't genocide the world. Don't go to war. Those would be good things. But he's not talking about things you shouldn't do because we're not under the law. He's saying don't get involved in false worship. Don't be involved in worship at all. Bowing down and offering sacrifices. Drinking blood. This is superstition. It's disgusting, and it literally is worshiping the darkness. So it's like a father who says, don't go play in the street. Yeah, you're 20 years old. You can do what you want. But you understand your father's saying, look, you may not know this, but there's cars running by there and you might get hit. And out of wisdom, we understand these are things we shouldn't do. There's nothing to do with being under the law. But we don't want to become servants to anyone, not even our own bellies. So we shouldn't be offering sacrifices. We shouldn't be idolaters. And we shouldn't be partaking of any kind of blood. And from what is strangled. Now, that word is odd to me. Because it's found 3 times in the Bible. And nobody really knows what it means. And if you really dig deep, they say it's unknown. We do not know. We're only guessing that it means strangled or suffocation. Strong's or something, they'll just tell you, oh, it means that. But if you get to digging, they'll say, well, we don't know where the word came from. It's probably pre-Greek. Okay, if you go back far enough, when they were just forming the Greek, like before Homer and Hesiod, they were bringing words in from the Egyptian and maybe other places. So we don't know if this is an Egyptian word that's transliterated or what, but we don't know what this word means. The word is phanou. Phanou means to breathe. And the kit on the end, we don't know what it means. On is syntax. We don't know, but it has something to do with breath, so they assume because of the context of the 3 places where it's used, that it may have to do with stop breathing. So they say strangled or drowned in one case, or choked in another case, where the weeds choke out the grain. Choking, drowning, or suffocating. Well, what is this talking about? Could it be some ceremonial satanic rite that we're not supposed to get involved in? Maybe. Have you heard about this thing, some of the movie stars, what was it, David Carradine was found in his closet. He was hung. There was another strange circumstance around Robin Williams' death. A lot of them died from some sort of drug overdose because they're involved in rituals and drugs, friends. But I don't know specifically, and I don't think anybody does because this word is lost to us. It only has something to do with breath and maybe the ceasing of breathing. Whether it's talking about not eating animals that die of their own. I've heard a lot of people say, well, under the law of Moses, you weren't allowed to eat things strangled. Well, that's true. The Judeans weren't. But the Gentiles could. And here we are talking to Gentiles. Why would James say, you're not under law, but, we want you to keep this one little crazy law that's in the, law of Moses. Don't eat strangled meat. That doesn't make any sense. In fact, in the Old Testament, if they found, under the law, it says if they found an animal that died of itself along the road, maybe it got ran over by a horse or something, they didn't have cars. I mean, maybe somebody strangled it or got choked out or died of a heart attack or old age. It's laying along the road. Well, the Judean people were not allowed to eat it, but they could sell it to a Gentile. So it's not true that Gentiles couldn't eat what was strangled and that Judeans couldn't sell it or have other people eat it. Put it in a soup and give it, as charity to the Gentile. They could do that. People have this idea that eating things that's strangled or that has blood in it is some sort of anathema, that the Bible doesn't ever say anything like that. It does say that when you sacrifice an animal, you have to give the blood to Yahweh. But it doesn't say anything more than that. So we don't know what that word means. But now, so far, everything has to do with this crazy, evil religion where people are drinking blood and sacrificing to idols. And the next one is and from porneia. And of course, if you notice, they says from sexual immorality is how they interpret that or how they translate that. And I'm going to tell you something, friends. This is absolutely wrong. And this is going to show why James and the other apostles are actually telling us these several things that we're not supposed to do and why it has to do with this apostasy. Because there's only one religion. They only had the one temple, so Aphrodite, Artemis, and they were all the same teachings. There's astrology. But they fell into apostasy and they become idolaters. The Apostle Paul said they began to worship the four-footed beasts. Why'd they do that? The hosts of heaven. They worship the star and the sun and the moon. What does this mean? They can't be worshiping beasts and stars. Are they that stupid? It's astrology. They thought those animals in the sky that ruled in your house were anthropomorphic beings, and they began to worship four-footed beasts because of idolatry. They idolized it, and they made it into some image of a four-footed beast and said, this is what we're going to worship because these are rulers. They rule over your house. You've got to obey them and appease them. And that's idolatry. We understand that astrology rules this house. We understand the vengeance of Yahweh, but we're no part of this world. We're spiritual children. We passed over from death into life. And we're no longer under the laws of this world because we've been set free from these things by Christ. So, what does this porneia mean? Because this is going to explain what all of this is about. Because this word porneia does not mean sexual immorality, but it's going to explain to you why it's so important that we don't get involved in this apostasy that was going on. I'll take a look. All right, so porneia, which is always translated fornication. And growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, they would teach us, and I believe this is pretty much what just about all the Christendom teaches, that porneia, fornication, is just any kind of illicit sex. And when they say that, you're supposed to know that everything that has to do with sex is shameful, except missionary style with your wife. Everything else is porneia, basically. Now, I'm sure there are liberal pastors and stuff will say, oh, well, I don't believe you. But their own books say that this fornication is pornography, same word, porno. And anything to do with sex is a sin. It's disgusting. It's behind the counter. So fornication is all sexual sin. So they use fornication, whoredom, and metaphysically or something, idolatry. And if you will look that up anywhere on the internet, almost, I guess 9 out of 10, I don't know, there might be an article somewhere where they'll say, hey, you know what? This word means prostitution. It doesn't mean all these other things. But I don't think you'll find very many of those because nobody seems to be able to break the mesmerism, the hypnotism. And if you can't figure what, if you go and look up the word in a dictionary, in a biblical dictionary or a Strong's Concordance, they're always going to give you a false meaning. It is just literally all of its false. And they get around it by saying, oh, this is the usage. And some say this and some say that. Okay, but what does it really mean? If you refrain from telling us that somebody in classical Greek used it only for prostitution, that's all it ever meant, but that since the church turned it into everything, and this is a diabolical plot because every one of these words that has to do with paganism and the temples and Diana and Artemis and the sacrament and all these things, Easter and Christmas, it's all been hidden from you. I'm going to prove to you that the word fornication doesn't mean just sexual sin, any kind of sex outside of marriage. And it's very simple to do from their own book or for their own dictionary. So it says fornication, and it's the root of the English terms pornography and pornographic. And it says 4205 pornos, which is derived from perneo, to sell off. Properly, a selling off, surrendering of sexual purity, promiscuity of every type. All right. That's what they're saying, and they're sticking to it. But they couldn't help tell you the truth because they can't just be flat out liars. So they say, well, it's derived from selling. Are you seeing that selling sex is really prostitution? But we're going to go further than that. And because that, you might say, well, that doesn't necessarily mean like selling sex, even though it says it is, but maybe it means something else. Because if it were, they'd tell us. Let's look at 4205. Pornos. A fornicator. That's what they say it means, but they're lying. Take a look. Fornicator, a man who prostitutes himself. Pornos from porneia, to sell off. Properly, a male prostitute. Pornos is properly a male prostitute. There you go. It does not mean sex. Sex is not a sin. The apostles and the prophets did not tell you that it was a sin. They did not tell you to abstain from all sex except for what is in a marriage. First of all, marriage is nowhere to be found in the Bible. There is a selling, Exodus 21:7, when you sell your daughter as a slave, she'll never go free. That is what we call marriage today. You know the dowry thing? That's why she calls her husband the Lord. Husband means your owner because they purchased you. So, according to this, we're not to be involved in porneia or pornos, and therefore we should not be involved in actual marriage, where women are sold by their fathers to a man for money. Now, today, we don't get money, although we do have the bridal showers and all the gifts and all this. It's the same thing. But you're still under the same contract, which is you're sold. Thou must do this and this and that. Till death do you part. You're under contract, and that's not scriptural. And that should be enough. Let's go down where it says the origin of the word, akin to porny. Well, let's look that little word up. Porny, porne, a prostitute, a prostitute. So down here, a harlot, harlots, and prostitutes. A woman who sells her body for sexual uses. That's why the word is to sell. A prostitute, a harlot. So that's what the Sanhedrin, the apostles and the elders, wanted to tell them. You're not under law, but we want you to eat a specific diet and don't touch blood, don't take a transfusion. Silly little things. Oh, don't eat strangled animals. Why didn't they mention don't rape and pillage and go to war and don't lie and all these things? Because we're not under law, we're under the Spirit, and we're not going to do any of those things because we have love. But there could be some things that are people are being deceived, and you wouldn't know because it has nothing to do with love. It's just that people are deceiving others, and the apostles are saying that's not true religion, what they're doing. We don't sanction that. The apostle Paul says, hand him over unto Satan, get him out of the church. We don't eat a meal with such a one, or the communal meal, because we don't want our love feast to turn into some satanic gluttony rite, where everybody's having sex and drinking and doing all these crazy things. This is not what we do. That's all that he's saying. Look, yeah, we're not under law, but you guys, you Gentiles in that temple, it's gotten apostate up there. We want you to understand that's idolatry. Don't get involved in it is in the sense of idolatry. Understand they're in apostasy. Don't be sacrificing any animals to any deity, including Judaism. And so don't be sacrificing animals. Don't be drinking any blood. Whatever this strangle thing is, it had something to do with sacrifices or some kind of idolatry. And don't get involved in the illicit sexual prostitution in the temples that's going on. The worship of these four-footed beasts and these porneia parties. That's not true worship. They don't know what the orgia is, or the mysterion. They're being taught lies, and they're in apostasy. Now you can read Paul and see where he's trying to help them understand that we're not to be gluttons. Well, he didn't condemn them all. Evidently, they were all up there having sex and being gluttons and talking crazy like they're all drunk at once, and nobody knew what was going on. And Paul didn't say, you're all condemned. Even to the point where there was some guy that was publicly sleeping with his father's wife, I guess, with a public display. Because they got into these ideas that if grace will abound if we do evil, then let's do more evil that grace may abound. The Apostle Paul warned of this apostasy. And that's why he kept saying, don't be a glutton. It's not like, oh, you overate, you ate too much pizza, you're a sinner. That's not what he's talking about. Who defines what is a glutton? People eat too much sometimes, people drink too much. But what we're talking about is the gluttony that's in these temples. The excess. And taking young girls and boys and making them basically prostitutes. And this is the apostasy that was in the Greek temple of Artemis, where Paul preached in the amphitheater of Tyrannicus, which is right outside the temple hall. So they would go and do their ceremonies, and they had like some kind of an orator, like theater or whatever, where people would discuss the mysteries. And if you read in there in the New Testament where it describes what Paul was doing, some of them were saying, hey, you're ruining our idolatry, right? We're getting money off these statues, and we're making statues people are worshiping, and you're running people away, and they're not doing the idolatry anymore, Paul. And so we demand that you leave and stop preaching here. Well, then there were others who said, what are you talking about? You can't make him leave. He's teaching against idolatry, but he has not blasphemed Artemis. And when you blaspheme a deity, what that means is you talk against them. So he's saying Paul's not talking against Artemis, but he's telling you you're in idolatry. You see this statue here to the unknown deity? This is the true deity, Paul says. And one of your prophets said, and he was correct. So, yes, Paul spent every Sabbath preaching to the Judeans. That's where they would listen. And then he preached at the amphitheater of Tyrannus at the temple of Artemis for the Gentiles. He went to the Jews first, and they didn't listen. They rejected him, and then he went to the Greeks. And so in all of his letters, he talks about this mystery and these mysteries that were done in the temple and the orgia. It's all throughout in the New Testament. And the sacrament and the speaking in tongue, the glossolalia. They use the same word up there at Artemis, the glossolalia. They spoke in tongues. And they also had the sacrament. And they also had the Essenes. That's what they call their priests. And we could go through all the eunuchs and the virgins and all that the love feasts and down the line. There's absolutely no question what early Christianity really was. And so today people say, well, how come the Catholics got these big cathedrals dedicated to Mary and some other, John or some other biblical figure? They're saying, weren't those the same temples that were dedicated to Aphrodite and Artemis or some other ancient Greek deity? How can Christians be worshiping in these temples that were once dedicated to false gods? Well, because there are no gods and they were never dedicated to false gods. But Diana happens to be the daughter of Jacob. He had 12 sons and one daughter. And that woman, Diana, married the Canaanite high priest Sechem, and their child, Asenath, married Joseph when he went down into Egypt. And when they come up out of Egypt, they came up with a great mixed multitude, a great multitude of people, nations, tribes, and tongues. It wasn't just the 12 tribes that came up out of there, but remember, there were 70 souls in the loins of Jacob, and 70 souls came up out of Egypt, and that's the nations. And Judaism is an appendage to that zadokite priesthood. They fell away into apostasy. And then later on, the 10 tribes fell away into apostasy and began to become idolaters and use excess and gluttony. And so the Apostle Paul talks about gluttony and excess and prostitution. It was forbidden for a Christian. It was a sin to be involved in prostitution. Now, how can it be a sin? Because the word in the New Testament for sin is now not the same as the word sin in the Old Testament. That was a transgression of the law. We're not under any law, so we cannot sin or transgress the law. But we can sin, which is a Greek word which means miss the mark, because we're supposed to practice with our bow to hit the bullseye, which is going up over the horizon in Taurus. And we got to learn to hit the bullseye. And if we make a mistake, we don't fall down and cry and give up. We know that nobody can hit the bullseye. You got to practice. See, we're missing the mark, but we're practicing. And so the Apostle Paul says that sin is to do anything without faith. See, if you know that what you're doing is right and you do it, or you believe it's right and you do it, then it's not, your intentions are good, then it's not a sin. No matter what it is, do unto others, you would have them do unto you. But if we know that that would hurt us, that that is something that would be painful, if we're not following love, because that's how we're guided by love, that means we don't want to hurt anybody. So as long as we listen to the love and the compassion and the Holy Spirit within us, we cannot sin. The Apostle John said, whoever is a Christian has been born from the Lord, and his seed dwelleth in him, and he cannot sin. Because we can't transgress a law we're not under. And we can't go against love, because that's what we are. And even though you have love, like he says, there might be, like, if I took my brother's coat and sold it, that wouldn't be right. We know that your brother would be upset if he found out you didn't respect him and you just took his coat. Now he don't have a coat. Well, maybe there was somebody that offered me $1 million for that coat, and I didn't have time to explain it. Well, is it still sin? No. It's about intent. Even under the law, you're never supposed to murder, but then it talks about going out and killing people and going to war. Well, we have the right to defend ourselves. So you see, no law leads to righteousness. No one knows what's right or wrong except with compassion, with love. We're not under any law. So what is these 3 things? Well, don't kill, don't rape, and don't go to war. No, that might make sense. Do everything else, anything else you want in the world, but don't kill people. Okay, that sounds good. But that's not what this is about. He says, we're not under any law, but don't be deceived. Don't be idolaters. You're going to ruin your Christian walk if you're going to be mesmerized by these demons under their spell. And if you believe that they're beings and that they have power over you, that's your deity, and you have to appease them and sacrifice to them, then you're not going to advance as a Christian. And you can't be teaching that in the church or amongst the brethren. You need to be encouraging them and enlightening them. And if you haven't gotten the enlightenment after being initiated, right, then you will teach you again if you're sincere. But if you're teaching against the Christ, the Antichrist doctrine, if you're leading people into blindness, spiritual blindness, into debauchery, which leads to death, not because you broke a law, so you got to die, but no, you jumped off a cliff and it led to death. That's stupid and it's foolish. So here are the things that the apostles say we're not supposed to do. Don't get involved in sacrificing to idols. It's ridiculous. And don't be buying and selling women and slaving them out, the populace, and getting all full of lust and gluttony and these love feasts, and you're all reading in some kind of craziness. This is not Christian. It leads to indulgence and addiction. Deeper and deeper, you're becoming a slave to your own belly. So yeah, it wasn't the only thing you weren't supposed to do. The apostles just mentioned those 3 things, but later on, Paul talked about, don't be a glutton, right? Don't be a drunk. Well, we're not under the law. It's just saying we got to have control. We have to have self-control, because the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, mildness, goodness, kindness. It's not indulgence and lust. That's not the fruit of the Spirit. So this is what Christianity originally was. Now, there's a lot more that we could go through to show that this was going on. We haven't talked about the eunuchs. Jesus said you should become a eunuch. What does this really mean? We could go through all the particulars, but we're getting down to where we're almost an hour. But I think you guys understand. We've talked about this a little already. And we'll continue to talk about this in upcoming videos. But early Christianity was the mysteries. And John wasn't just some righteous teacher that nobody ever heard of in the world, just out there wandering around in the desert. No, John was the leader of the entire religious movement worldwide. in all the temples throughout all the world. He was the head grand poobah. And when Jesus came, he said, everybody look, this is the Messiah, the one that was to come, that all of the prophets in every nation, Zoroastrianism, Shintoism, Hinduism, Taoism, all of it. Daniel was the man we call Zoroaster, number 2. There were 2 Zoroasters. And Buddha was Ezekiel. And Elisha, the student of Elijah, was the Elisu, which started the Eleusinian mysteries in Athens. The Dionysius of the Temple of Dionysius. And the true teachings were all over the world. And one day there's going to be a restoration of the 10 tribes. It's already begun. We've got the Book of Mormon that gives you the history of the Native American people, some of it anyway. We haven't got all of it. And we're digging up the Sumerian tablets and the Babylonian and all this stuff. We're beginning to translate Egyptian. After we got the Rosetta Stone, now we can translate Egyptian hieroglyphs. And all of this knowledge is coming back. We're finding out it's astrology. And yet Christians are resisting the truth. They're saying, we've got the Bible. We need no more Bible. We've got a book. We've got a book. Oh, we know everything, and we don't want to know anything more. And that's all pagan, What I believe is the only right belief. Well, there is only one truth. And that truth is in and taught by the esoteric wisdom in all the scriptures, which is astrology, which was given to us by Enoch, who in the Egyptian was Thoth. We are misunderstanding a lot. Most of the world and all the churches and religions of the world, we're all teaching the same esoteric wisdom, the astrology, and the priesthoods were all about these mysteries that were handed down since before the flood with Enoch. So all the royal bloodlines go back to Noah, back to Adam. All the priesthoods go back to these teachings of astrology, back to Enoch. So they're all the same. But over time, they became apostate. And today, people are in absolute darkness and have no idea what these mysteries are. So we're trying to show you what Christianity originally was. And there's a whole lot more to this that we've talked about in other videos. But we can't go much further today. We're getting close to an hour. I'm going to go ahead and leave it there then. But we'll continue on with this tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful evening. May the Lord bless you guys. He will bless you. And friends, I believe that the Feast of Tabernacles, which is October 16th, is probably somewhere before or after that, give or take. I believe the Great Tribulation may be going to begin. And, I've been expecting it any time since this spring. But it's about here. They're gearing up for it. So you got to be prepared, guys. We'll leave it there and we'll see you tomorrow and have a good one.